And the booming foreign massage parlour industry is accused of being used as a vehicle for human trafficking. Statistics suggest that 900,000 people are trafficked in the country annually. The International Organization for Migration says many of them end at Thai and Chinese massage parlours. The organization says approximately 30,000 of the victims are children. The report says while some of the victims end in forced labour, others get thrust into prostitution. Joining us in studio is Natalie Singer, PR and Communications Officer for CAPES. And we're also joined by Major Margaret Stafford, Anti-Human Trafficking Coordinator for the Salvation Army. Good evening to both of you, ladies, and thank you so much for joining us. So CAPES, just to establish your organization, is the Confederation of Associations in the Private Employment Sector. Explain exactly what you do, Natalie.
Great, thank you, Cindy. We are the umbrella body that represents the private employment services industry in South Africa. And we are promoting fair regulation for the industry to ensure that everybody that is operating legitimately in the private employment services space or recruitment agencies operate in accordance with all legislation of the country, as well as international best practice and codes of ethics.
And we know that we have hugely regulated industries, policies and mechanisms to protect vulnerable people, but there always will be unscrupulous characters, very sophisticated syndicates as well. Major, in your experience, just how vast and how serious is the human trafficking problem?
Well, just the people that I have come into contact with, it's growing. The more we have desperate young people wanting to find a job, the more you're going to find somebody filling that space to try and make sure that they get a job. So, sometimes that job is not something that you or I would think is a good job.
But how do they go under the radar if we do have bodies that would monitor or would be affiliated to legitimate businesses?
Yeah, I think the challenge, as with everything, you mentioned quite correctly, we have a lot of existing legislation and a very important sector in our economy who are compliant. It's the enforcement mechanisms which require work. And that's something we work with as an industry with our colleagues at Department of Labour to find ways of working together to ensure that if there are unscrupulous operators, that they are shut down as fast as possible. I think it's also important to recognise that many of these individuals are not at all associated with our industry, but they take advantage of the vulnerability of people who are looking for work and use a job advert, which is a false advert, as a means of attracting people into their criminal activities.
And Major, a case study perhaps, we talk about statistics because that's the nature of news, that it should be informative, educational, etc. But it's just statistics, and yet these are people's lives, it's people's children that have either gone missing, they're not accounted for, and they're out in the streets on their own at the hands of criminals, essentially.
Right, so we have a young girl that wants to go and work in Turkey. Her friend was working there. She was an au pair for a family. And the friend says, look, I'm coming home. You can take over from me. This is all you need to do. And I get a phone call. What do you need to go into Turkey? So it's a quick phone call to the Turkish embassy and saying, listen, what do you need to be an au pair in your country? This girl was told none of what she needed to have done. If she had gone to Turkey on the instruction of her friend and said, just get a holiday visa, you'll be fine, everything will be sorted out once you get here, she would have been arrested in Turkey and would have been there under false pretenses. Same with another young woman now gone to teach overseas. She got the right papers, she had everything legit. When she got to the school, they didn't have a license for foreign teachers. She's now in jail. So those are just two case studies of people with foreign jobs that they just weren't well prepared to look through them and check out these things. And not everybody thinks to check through.
Yeah, but is it just naivety, or is it a case of something that seems legitimate and not checking, as you were saying, being informed, inquiring whether they're certified or going through with the regulatory bodies to know if this thing is legit?
I think that's exactly the point, is that, we advocate for educating yourself. In fact, we just had a meeting today with our colleagues from Department of Labour, and with the high-profile coverage we've seen about trafficking of the last few weeks, we were talking about how can we help practically. So we're in the process of putting together some basic guidelines on what are some questions that you can ask yourself and the other party to legitimize for yourself whether this is a a proper opportunity. I think the challenge that the international market brings and global connectedness with the internet is that it's very easy for a criminal to make themselves look quite legitimate, create a website, create this presence, and falsely create the impression that they are legitimate. But we were interviewed last week, and we had some suggestions there as well. Simply Googling the address they give you will tell you whether it is the building they say it is, or it's a BP garage, or just an empty warehouse somewhere.
Right.
There's some really simple things that individuals could do to protect themselves.
Does this speak of a level of trust, if you like, as you were saying, or even a high level of desperation that this is my lucky break? I've been through this for so long, and I can't bypass it.
I'm not so sure that it's even trust. We had a young girl come up from KZN to meet with a guy in Kempton Park. She'd never been out of her town. To meet with a guy in Kempton Park because he offered her a job. He paid for her ticket to come up with the train. He met her at the station. Everything looked legit up until that point. She ended up locked up in a flat in Hillbrow, eventually escaping, and we helped with that and to get her into safety. But what I'm saying to you, what would possess you to leave a place and to go to a place you've never been to meet a man you've met on social media?
Well, maybe lack of discernment, or is it lack of, I don't know, survival skills? You know,
that's it. So how do we put that? And that's what we want to address things like that. But what we would like to do is any young person that's traveling overseas, maybe for the first time, even on an exciting holiday or a job, a fake job sometimes. We've had some end up in Ireland, actually thinking that they're going as domestic workers, and paying a lot more because they're getting paid in British pounds and all of this kind of thing, only to be found that they're going to be in slavery, getting no money at all, until they finally got to a church, and that church group helped them escape. So how does that happen? And how do we prevent that? There are some countries, some African countries, that don't allow a first-time flyer to go without some kind of, listen, this is what you need to expect, this is the size of the airport, this is where you need to go, there's just some knowledge on every country, and this is the embassy's number.
Yeah, but I mean the responsibility, as you were saying, Natalie, that the onus is, unfortunately, on those that would have fallen prey to the criminals. And by that time, it's late, because they have been tarnished, they've been broken, and they've seen too much at an early age. So where is the gap? Is it about parenting? Is it about society? Is it about... just take the example of the high teenage pregnancy rate, the high infection of HIV, etc., amongst young people, etc. The information is out there. There are campaigns. There are platforms like these. We vent these out on a yearly, on a daily, and yet we still see people falling prey to this kind of practice.
It is definitely a bigger societal issue, because it's all of those things. It's a lack of education, it's a lack of worldliness, it's the desperation. And often, the example that you used of the young lady from rural KZN, she probably doesn't have a network to go to ask advice. So if somebody offered me a job, I would go and have a chat to my parents about that. Perhaps she's living with her grandmother who isn't worldly, who has never left her village, and where the thought of earning 2,000 Rand a month seems to be the miracle that they've been waiting for, as you said. And so I think, what we can only do is we can only continue as far as possible to put out as many different advocacy campaigns as we can, and to ensure that the legislation that already exists is properly enforced and policed, to close as many gaps as possible that exist for people to take advantage.
I also, though, want to say to you that never underestimate the traffickers, because we had one case where a young man wooed an entire family for nearly a year before he finally took the girl. And by the time he had been to the family, he had bought groceries, the grandmother knew him, the family knew him, they were all trusting him. And then he would say, listen, my uncle's got a farm in Greece, let's go there, it will work, just one holiday season, by the time she comes back she'll have enough for high school. And university, doesn't matter, she'll have enough money. Never seen again. So don't underestimate the fact that a trafficker is pretty clever in doing all of these things. I think one thing, though, Natalie, we had a case just the other day of a young lady that was phoning me about a recruitment that wanted 600 Rand up front and then more money. Natalie, very quickly, you told us that no recruitment agency should be asking for money. So that's just one thing that we know should be out there, but not a lot of people know about.
So the legislation is very clear. A recruitment company may not charge any fees of any kind to a work seeker. So legitimate or not illegitimate, there are no fees that are allowed to be charged.
Okay, but what about the incentive, though? When somebody says, look, are you willing to travel? You've got a passport, all your expenses are paid for, you've got accommodation and a family to receive you. How do you then verify that kind of
So that is the challenge, isn't it? Because we do live in a global world. There are very legitimate agencies who do find individuals to work as au pairs. They find people to work in America. I myself lived for 2 years in the UK on a working holiday visa. So there are legitimate opportunities. I have friends teaching English overseas in Thailand. The challenge, I think, is being sure that you are dealing. So there are a couple of practical things. Firstly, I would be very cautious of any opportunity that says you require no experience and no qualification and everything will be fine. And, oh, by the way, they don't have to meet you. Because I don't know of any legitimate employer who's going to take on a person who they've never interacted with and who has no experience or qualification that at least in some way links to what the work is they're going to be doing. There would usually be a lengthy recruitment process, especially for people going overseas. So you would go through a series of interviews, you would have to have some assessments done, a criminal check, a credit check, you would have to have a passport in place. There are a lot of practical steps that would need to be taken in the recruitment process. So yes, of course, it does not stop somebody from being sophisticated and wooing. There will be those people. But if there aren't those things, that should be a red flag immediately. If somebody's paying for everything, that also should be a red flag, because why are you paying for everything?
Right.
So I sound contradictory because I said you shouldn't pay fees and somebody should pay for you, but I think it's how it's presented to you and what is the process that you're going to go through before you are properly accepted into that job and provided. And as the Major has pointed out, you know, just do a quick check with the embassy to say what are the requirements to work in Ireland, and you will very quickly see that you can't just simply turn up without a visa and in certain categories of work. And usually it's limited to scarce skills. If you don't have a scarce skill, it's very difficult to be employed on a work permit.
Yeah, I mean, it boggles the mind. It's just as you're speaking now, the modus operandi changes depending on which syndicate that you're dealing with. So even to police that would be quite an
just when we think we know
practice.
what they're doing in the anti-human trafficking world, a new thing comes up, and then I'm like gobsmacked. We ran, Salvation Army goes along to Sexpo every time they have it. And we ran a program there. Now, that's a very yuppie crowd. They think they're very open-minded. Nobody can fool them. And we ran a program called Whipped, where we set up a dummy corporation. We said 50,000 Rand a year, a month, 50,000 Rand a month. You'll go to the top 10 parties around the world, chauffeur-driven, clothes. Do you know that just about every single person that walked past that booth signed up? They gave us their name, everything. They gave us every bit of information they could possibly give us so that they would be chosen for this amazing job. And the minute that they gave us everything, we sent them an SMS to say that they had nearly become a statistic, because nobody checked us out. Nobody even thought about what we were going to be doing. And that's exactly how quickly we think nobody will fool me, even me. Nobody's going to fool me. I know this stuff inside out. I have a social worker friend who knows everything about anti-human trafficking, but was nearly trafficked into Nigeria.
My goodness. So how do we then, the safety net, especially for the most vulnerable, as you were saying, that it even across the strata, that anybody is a potential victim. So
anybody. I mean, even the case that was in the Star newspaper today, the woman is 34 years old. Now, we would always imagine that it was about 15 to 25. Those are sort of the age group. Do you understand what I'm saying? When it changes every single time we look again, and because women at 34 are beautiful, and there are men that
women are generally beautiful.
Oh, exactly. But for me, as long as there's a demand out there, somebody's going to buy it. Somebody is going to go into that business. Money, the root of the love of money is the root of all evil. It's not money. Money is something we need on a day-to-day basis, but that...
Yeah. So besides the campaigns where you scare off young people and, to say this could potentially be you, a victim, a nameless body somewhere where your family can't even get to you. So what is it that is tangibly, especially in areas where there isn't access to information, Natalie, around jobs, because we know that is probably one of the driving motivations why people respond to these things.
Okay, so I think a couple of practical things. So if you are going to be looking for a job and you're going to use an agency, which is a great method for finding a job because they have multiple clients who are looking for individuals and they use the agency to do the shortlisting and the verification. So it's a great opportunity. My first suggestion is, as a minimum, they should be asking that agency for their Department of Labour certificate because it is a requirement to be licensed with the Department of Labour. They can also go on the Department of Labour's website and look them up on the list. Yeah. That should be the minimum requirement. If they don't have that, then I would say walk away from them because there are many other agencies they could go to. As a second tier, the preference should be not only to deal with an agency who is registered with the Department of Labour, but one that belongs to one of the professional bodies. And they can get the list of the professional bodies from our website, the CAPES website, which is just capes.org.za. And they not only are required to be compliant with legislation, but they're also held accountable to best practice standards, including how they advertise, how they interview, how they reference, all of those things which is part of the process. And if there is any question they have or a concern, they can, without any cost, contact the association or the professional body and ask for guidance and advice. That's a free service. And so that would be my number one suggestion. Of course, there are lots of individuals who are recruiting for themselves. So again, if it's a company or an individual, I would be wary of people who use Gumtree, for example, these free mechanisms, because there's a lot less control there. Whereas if they looked in, on one of the job boards, there's a fee that has to be paid. And again, it doesn't mean that there's not somebody with nefarious intentions, but it's less likely to be the case.
All right, let's go through the whole value chain in the sense that if there were protection mechanisms, that the onus is also on be it media, wherever these advertisements are placed, to ensure that that classified information is indeed what they say it is.
Exactly. We were talking. Even there's an advert at the moment trending for young people to be paid to go on dates. The more you get given, the more is expected of you, right? So I'm saying, how dangerous is that ad? Because here's a young person at university needing to find, say 7,000, 8,000 rand. So let's ask a date for 3,500 rand. What is going to be expected from that person? And what I'm trying to say is that there is just so much out there for us to those are brilliant suggestions from Natalie, and that should be taught at school. We should know, kids before they leave school should know how to go onto the labour.gov website and what to look for and how to look for it. They should already start having career mapping done. That should be happening at schools, and I'm sure it does at some.
I think that's a life orientation, but even that, as Natalie was saying, that it needs a multi-pronged approach,
yes.
Society and parenting, etc.
Yes.
And over and above that, the access to social media platforms, etc., the pressure on young people to have that so-called Instagram lifestyle, the gratification that comes with doing little and earning